Since this is my last meeting, I have taken the liberty of putting together a presentation that I call Some Parting Thoughts from 9/11 to Top Secret GIS. My intent here is to hopefully frame up some ideas about where stuff came from and how we are more or less where we are now, and at the same time honor all the people as best I can that I've worked with on the EPC, because there are some simply outstanding, nationally unique individuals that have participated in what's gone on here over the years. And as as best I can, I would like to point that out. So, some parting thoughts from 9/11 to Top Secret GIS, because you did not hear this from me. So, we're going to start out, we're going to go for a little ride in a time machine. Here's what life was like on September 10th, 2001. U.S. mapping, U.S. Geologic Service survey. You can see what's going on over there on the left-hand side screen. They're concerned about, animals and plants, and occasionally they're going to throw on, some buildings here and there, that kind of thing. And the primary map that anybody's running around with, yep, you go on and you get a topo map at the USGS or some sporting goods store, and everybody's driving around with a road atlas. How bizarre. And lo and behold, ArcGIS 8.1, official release date on April 24th. Wow, we're smoking. Now, if you want to see something even more amazing, check this out. So in 1998, you could buy the phone on the left, which the antenna drove me absolutely out of my mind, for $900. That was a Nokia 6160. And 3 years later, you could buy that smaller one down there for $100. But more interestingly, people were actually calling one another on the phone. And like, if you couldn't reach somebody, you'd leave a message, and the person on the other end of the phone would actually call you back when they got the voice message. There, there was no texting. All right. So then this happened. And I know you didn't think this is the reality of what happened on September 11th, 2001, but that's the day the GIS world changed forever. And here's why, okay? Down there along the bottom, you got the realities. It's the first significant attack by a foreign adversary inside the borders of the United States since the War of 1812. It immediately exposed the vulnerability of a modern interconnected society. And most recently, can you say CrowdStrike? Let's just shut everything down for 4 or 5 days. Light bulb goes on that 80% of the U.S. infrastructure is in civilian hands. And immediately, what happens inside the halls of the federal government? It's this massive where scramble. Where is all this stuff? Because we're going to have to protect it. And the Department of Defense, now think about this. The Department of Defense doctrine of outward focus only. The only place you ever use the Department of Defense is outside the borders of the United States, in Europe, in Asia, whatever. All of a sudden, they got to be thinking inside the borders of the United States, and the concern is not WMD. It's a WIME or a WIM or whatever you want to call that thing. What the hell is that? Now, if you talk to anybody that knows what they're talking about in this world, here's your top secret takeaway number one. Big, bad, and ugly is still out there. Trust me, even in the state of Minnesota. You may not think it is, but trust me, that capability is still out there, that we could end up with something big, bad, and ugly here. And what do I mean by that? It's not a weapon of mass destruction. You blow up the Mira building in Oklahoma City, And people are labeling that, as bad as it was, a WMD event. What you want to worry about is a weapon or incident of mass effect. Hundreds of thousands of people impacted about it. I'll give you an example. If the New Madrid quake zone ever pops down in, outside of Memphis into Missouri and Arkansas, like it did in the early 1800s, you will have refugees in Minnesota. I guarantee it. Because that thing pops because of the issues of the crossing oil lines and gas lines and all the stuff that runs from what's called the Henry Hub down in, lo and behold, Louisiana. There's going to be a lot of people with their lights out. Okay, on that cheery note, so the scramble begins. Let's lock everything down. It's the first reaction about what's going on here. So I've given you a list of the different, things that stood up and what form they took, and, presidential directive here and critical infrastructure information program there and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you get the idea. The federal government immediately jumps into the mode of, oh, since we got to protect all this stuff now, we better figure out where it is. So that drove a whole line of thinking. Now, who's going to provide pushback on that? It's Dairy Queen to the rescue. Absolutely. Now, probably hardly anybody on this call understands that the godfather of critical infrastructure awareness was actually a doctor working at the Minnesota DNR, Tom Eber. He was way ahead of his time. He was collecting critical infrastructure awareness data stuff like in the late 90s. And by 2020 or 2003, he had formally, named this thing and was working with it, blah, blah, blah. By 25, or by 05, you see how many data points he had. Well, why was he doing it? Because to support the wildfire community, he needed a briefing spot for wildfires to be able to go out there, hand them aerial imagery, and then explain to them what things were going to be the priorities to save. So this Homeland Infrastructure Foundation level data working group in DC invites him in to give his presentation. And did they learn the right thing from it? No. They just reinforced to them that we need to collect data and lock it down. And I'm guilty as charged, because while that's going on, yours truly was developing for the Department of Defense called something a state profile program, where basically Minnesota was the first to go. I rode around with FEMA all over the state looking at all kinds of different things and cataloging them in because of the need to be able to know if the Department of Defense needs to respond, where is stuff, who are the belly buttons, all of that kind of thing. Now, here's an interesting tidbit for you if you're not aware of it. At that time, what did we consider the greatest single natural threat to the state of Minnesota? Well, I got it labeled on there. It's Devil's Lake, North Dakota. It's not even in the state. Why was that considered? Because if you know anything about Devil's Lake, it's like a mystery. They've got water coming into this place over in North Dakota. They don't know where it's coming from. There's kind of some discussion that they think it might be like an underground aquifer that's bubbling up and filling this thing. But as you can see there by the levee around it, the Corps of Engineers has tried to, if you will, tamp this thing down. And the only thing it's done is create a situation where it was continuing to rise to the point where it was within like a couple of feet of what's known as freeboard. And if it goes over the freeboard, then the top of the levee's gone. Well, what would this do is it goes down the Cheyenne River Valley and would dump into the Red River Valley, and you'd have flooding in the Red River Valley that makes anything that's gone on in the past with the winter flows look like child's play. So that was the threat back then. I just looked this morning to see what the levels are, and it looks like it's been stable for an extended period of time. So that's a good thing. But that's how what life was like back in 2003, 2004. So what ends up happening? I get enlightened. I got enlightened. So I'm running around. I'm talking to people about this thing I'm building for DOD, and I'm like, so I go to the USGS guy, Ron Wenzel on the left hand side. And he says, does anybody know about this? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm just trying to get this thing done. He says, you have to go to this 14th annual conference of Minnesota GIS LAS. I come up there, do the presentation, and the guy down on the right hand side and I get talking. At least that's how I remember it. And I'm like, okay, I'm all in on this EPC thing that they're doing at the state of Minnesota. So, because what was Randy talking about? Top secret takeaway number two. The feds don't see the GIS world like you do. The feds think of things in terms of how they've been trained for the use of overhead imagery and CIA spooks running around and all the rest of it. They're collecting and retaining information for stuff that's outside the borders of the United States, and they've just applied the same model, just like I explained to you, I almost went down the road of. But then I hear these people at GIS LAS talking about collaboration and data sharing and how important it is. And I'm like, wait a minute. That makes sense because inside the borders of the United States, that is the only way we're going to get high quality data. So now the feds start having some problems. Here's the first one. February 8th, 2005. Google rolls out this thing. And trust me, there was panic inside the halls of the US government because now all their efforts to lock down data just instantly got poofed. Because now, oh, look, I've got aerial imagery over my house. Isn't that amazing? And then came problem number two, this thing, the 2005 hurricane season. Check it out. Four Cat 3 Atlantic Basin hurricanes in 57 days, and you've got the lowest, the fourth lowest, and the seventh lowest pressures ever recorded. Effectively, it's a WIME shows up. It's a weapon or incident of mass effect. You basically shut down the southeast quarter of the United States. Rita, when it hit, as an example, I don't know if you've ever seen the films of what they can do with the freeway system there, but it's 12 lanes out, and, or I should say, 6 lanes in either direction, and they can change it all over to 12 lanes out. And trust me, they were doing that. How do I know this stuff? Because who are you going to call? You're going to call in a circumstance like that when FEMA collapsed, and all of us can remember when this happened. FEMA did collapse because in that is no way throwing a barb at FEMA. As you've heard me say before, the reality is FEMA is 2,300 people with a checkbook, and they're not designed to be able to come in and take over a response like that. That's why there's an interagency plan to do that. And where does it usually end up? It ends up in the lap of the Department of Defense because it's the largest owner of stuff, chainsaws, people, you name it. So here we are in the basement of the Pentagon. This is a thing called the National Military Command Center. It's a couple stories down. I don't remember how far down it is, but if you've ever wandered on down there, you'd know the security is as tight as anything you've ever seen in your entire life. Anyway, the two people on here, well, you know who they are. One of them's a not so nice guy, and I'll tell you the guy on the left hand side of this picture is not the not so nice guy. So, anyway, continuing with that thought, I'm going to show you the overhead view of what's known as the Crisis Action Team Center. And the reason I'm showing this to you is because I need to drive home the point about what was there. So you can see there's a picture of me on the right hand side of the screen. There I am, big smile on my face. I'm in the Joint Chiefs of Staff boardroom. And outside of the Joint Chiefs of Staff boardroom, there was something hanging on the wall. I'm not kidding you. This is in the most secure like area of the Pentagon. Every computer in there is top secret or higher. They all have flaps on them. If somebody walks in that is not cleared to be looking at what's there, the flap immediately goes down, blah, 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 blah. And hanging on the wall in this place was a U.S. national, I should say, the National Geographic Society wall map with yellow stickies on it, trying to indicate where field hospitals, cruise ships, stuff that the Department of Defense was paying for to try to sort out, what was going on with this incident down here. And what I'm showing you in the box on the lower right hand side is on a normal year, the Department of Defense gets pulled in about 25 times a year to do stuff that the civilians need done. Like, we had a bad storm. Can you bring out a crew to help clear roads? Or we have a really bad wildfire season going on. We need some federal troops to come and help with that. 25. You can see the numbers for Katrina, Rita, Wilma, 393 different requests and support elements got sent out to help the civilians. Well, why does that matter to you? Well, let me show you why. If I can get Zoom to cooperate. It resulted in this. The light bulb went on for everybody that what was going on was not going to work, because you can't be trying to deal with something like that with a wall map and yellow stickies when hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people are impacted by it. So a meeting was called in February of 2006. You can call it the GIS meeting in the secure facilities at Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado Springs, Colorado. You can see there's I left the classified, unclassified stuff on here just so you got an idea who was there. My table partner was a guy by the name of Dave Ellis, who happens to have been the lead design, Sandia Labs, the guy that was the lead design individual for Star Wars. And they used me as the determining factor of whether or not what they were talking about would work, because I was their local rock. Here's the guy from the local area. He'll know whether or not this is going to work or not. So here's the problem. Email, text to try to deliver what's happening now does not work. Some of you have seen this before, and I'm not going to go into what these acronyms are. It's the concept. On the left-hand side of the screen are the agencies that are reporting up to POTUS as President of the United States. All the way across this thing in the textual or email world, or put together a PowerPoint world, what's happening is you have to continually roll stuff up to the next person and of the chain of command above you, and they need a period of time to review things, so that literally by the time the President of the United States goes out to talk to somebody at 9 o'clock Eastern in the morning, he's dealing with information that came out of the field in the neighborhood of 9 and 10 hours beforehand. Well, if you try to use that model, you're going to get slayed. because we call it the CNN problem. When are you dead? Anybody know when you're dead? You're only dead when the coroner says you're dead. That's an official count of you being dead. But if CNN's running around and they're talking to people and go, well, yeah, I saw 5 bodies float by yesterday and all the rest of that stuff, like, yeah, there's a guy over there in a tree and there's one by the road. And they're saying, hey, look, we've gone out and done a personal count and our numbers don't line up with your numbers. You're out to lunch. What's the problem? And then, of course, where's everybody buried down in Louisiana? They're buried above ground. And what happens during flooding? They come floating out in their caskets and so on. So it creates, right from the get go, a difference in how information is available. What's the answer? What is the only way you fix this? GIS is the only answer. You build your data on top of an accurately built geospatial understanding of things so that information is always being continuously updated. And that isn't me that came up with this. This is all of those brains that I showed you earlier came to the total understanding that this is how business was going to have to go forward. And what's key to making it happen? It's basic geospatial data and the ability to share it. And there was a program, believe it or not, that I watched a federal contractor strangle in its crib less than 2 months after this meeting happened. It was called the Homeland Data Sharing Program. And the whole idea was going to be about how do we create a mechanism that runs from ground truth all the way up to the top of the federal government that delivers on this promise of what geospatial data can do. So here's top secret takeaway number 3. I'm almost done. Don't worry. Geospatial data is key to the efficient management of any response. What? My house is burning down is useless without where. Want some proof? Here we go. Let's jump back to Minnesota. August 1st, 2007. I-35W bridge collapses. Okay, we got 2 counties. We got 4 cities. What do we know about the data around this? Everybody's looking at one another going, I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know. Or it's going to take some while. We don't know much. You know? Well, to the rescue. 2008. Some members of the EPC, and I'm going to stress some members. This is what the EPC looked like in part at that time. Because when you have a bridge collapse, what happens? People get really interested in how do we do this better? We have a problem here. Just the same way the light bulb went on in 2001 with big airplanes flying into big buildings. The I-35W bridge collapse drove home the point, even on a small scale like that, that maybe we ought to be doing something to get our act together better with what we know about geospatial data. And then we had some fabulous people doing outreach, like the picture of Joella Givens here. And of course, Dan Ross, God bless him, he did a lot as well in terms of getting folks to come on board and get interested in this. So 4 things started to happen. First was, I'll give you 4 examples of during that time period of things that the EPC did. And I'm doing this to frame things up so that those that go beyond us, come after us, have a sense of where all this comes from. Well, one of the first things we did was we were invited by Chris Eide to come into the state EOC and do an analysis of how things were there. And as you can see here, the reality at that time was this. I've clipped that out of the report. It says even the national benchmark state for emergency response, Florida, with 5 full-time GIS professionals assigned to its Division of Emergency Management, finds itself short-handed in this area. Geospatial support is what that means, when supporting around-the-clock operations associated with a major disaster. At that time, Minnesota, with no GIS personnel assigned to its HSEM staff, has had to rely on a minimalist pay-as-you-go GIS service provided by a lone limit that's a Land Management Information Center staffer. This approach has lacked utility and robustness due to its lack of integration in overall emergency management scheme. There it is. That report was one of the few things that the Governor's Council in its past form ever sent over to another agency, but it was invited by Chris Eide so that they had a way to begin figuring out how to bring those efforts on board at HSEM. There you go. So that's first thing. Then, bring modern GIS technologies to the EOC. This is a recent photograph, is my understanding from the article it came from NPR, of hopefully, as we saw earlier, that new building going up in Blaine will be thinking about the implementation of GIS in a more aggressive and more functional way. Then we wandered into the Republican National Convention in August of 2008, a little bit over a year later. And yep, while things are going great inside, things were not going so great outside. And into this mix, I'm extremely proud of all of the people on the EPC at that time because they found a way forward to make this happen. The EPC deployed the first ever local GIS team inside a national special security event, a multi-agency coordination center. That was the first time it was ever done in the nation, and it has become a model going forward. And Gordon Shenander, who was at the time at the Emergency Services Board, had been involved in the discussions and came knocking on the door, says, hey, we ought to think about seeing what we can do to help these folks. Well, I don't remember who it is exactly, and probably was Brian, worked hard with airborne data systems down in Redwood Falls to be able to develop a scheme where high resolution imagery would be ready at the drop of a hat. Bob Wasquez and the crew over at the City of St. Paul developed a regional data display, and there was some finagling that went on that we were able to get a Jabber messenger, which allowed the crew to talk to one another all the time through this messaging system that was secure. And on several different occasions, inside the multi-agency coordination center, they had to rely on local information to figure out what was going on. So it proved its worth, and I'm very proud of that and all the people that participated in it, because it was 20 some individuals that were involved. And fast forward to 2009, those concepts again proved valuable in supporting the Red River Valley flooding, largely led by Randy in determination of what could be done from a distance to provide mapping services to an area that needed help, and a wonderful development there as well. And finally, the Minnesota Structures Collaborative, the CAP grant. And as you can read there, what the CAP grant was about in the history of what the EPC has done is this was $50,000 that was applied for by MinGeo or LIMIC at the time. And, well, I guess it was MinGeo at the time. I didn't realize, just by the brochure, that's what it indicates. And the EPC, Structures Collaborative CAP initiative was designed to support the national map, the national spatial data infrastructure, and emergency response programs. It includes the development of state and local government partnerships and the technical capacity to support the collection, publication, and long-term sustainable maintenance of 4 critical structured GIS layers. Sound familiar? Schools, hospitals, police, and fire stations. This program was off to a great start, but did the federal government ever fund it after that first 50,000 bucks? The answer is no. And an unbelievably wonderful opportunity got squandered. Well, we're stuck as a result to this very day with this model of the current critical infrastructure data model of all those organizations on the right hand side reaching around and talking to county, tribal, city, whatever. Because here's the bottom line. Top secret takeaway number 4. The Beltway bandits don't care. A state needs to step forward and show the way forward to fix this situation because the military industrial complex isn't going to do it. And I'm talking Booz Allen Hamilton, MITRE, SAIC, Dun and Bradstreet. They're making money off of providing data that they've collected together and then run up the chain as if it is the de facto correct information. And unfortunately, a large part of the emergency management world believes because it came down the DHS channel that it is the definitive information. Something that absolutely, positively has to change. And sure enough, many of you seen this slide before. We are lucky enough in this state that we have people that have stepped up to the bat and the plate rather, and are willing to try to change that paradigm. And that's why I was saying earlier about the importance of what Stacy and Allison are up to, because here's, top secret takeaway number 5. You don't prepare geospatially during an incident. Doesn't work. Never has, never will. Would you want to wait to build a weather station after you found out tornadoes were headed your way? And because of the level of work and coordination required, probably more than any other part of the emergency management cycle, geospatial needs to be planned for and executed in advance. You can't mutual aid geospatial information. It's a challenge to maintain interest and drive. Yeah, EPC's gotten a whole bunch smaller than it was before because we're getting further and further and further away from that I-35W bridge collapse. But it doesn't minimize the importance of geospatial data and the need for it. So, as my parting plea, you saw that all the way back in 2010, 15 years ago, we were on the verge of moving this state forward with building a system that would get together data on 4 layers and be able to promote that up the stream. These ladies have moved forward and are working very hard to try to get us there on a second attempt at it. And I would ask you, kind of as the last thing as I get ready to go out the door, do whatever you humanly can to help them. Because here's your last top secret takeaway, number 6. This project isn't going to be easy, but it will be nationally important for the reasons I've tried to explain earlier in this presentation. The history that's led up to it, all the great people that have been involved in the past to try to get things to where they are. And it's not going to be the picture on the left. It's not going to be that. You're not going to flip a light switch and one day go from nothing to go to something. It's going to be this. It's going to be growing a tree over time. And that's a hard thing. Remember the persistence thing that I talked about earlier. You got to have people that'll hang in there. And that's what it's going to take. So that's me done blabbing for the last time. Are there any questions out there? Going once, going twice. All right, we're out of here.